I am very curious to hear what our panelists have to say. Thank you for coming.
So let's start really simply. What is simulation theory? What are we talking about? I'm going to give the most basic definition that I know of, and then we can start kind of unpacking it. And you guys, of course, can correct me if I'm not sure. The basic idea with simulation theory is this. If you believe that at any time in the future, that we will be able to create simulations wherein a person existing in that simulation wouldn't know that they were in a simulation. If we can ever create that kind of reality, then you have to believe that we are actually in a simulation today. And the basic reason for that is that if a simulation is able to be created, then we have to believe that it wouldn't just be one simulation, that it would be hypothetically billions of simulations. And if there were billions of simulated realities out there, why would we think that we're in base reality? It seems very arrogant. And of course, arrogance in that way is very human. In the very beginning, we were like, we are the center of the universe. And then it found out that we were not the center of the universe. And then we were like, well, but our star is the center of the universe. And then we found out that our star is not the center of the universe. And this is kind of the way it goes with humans. We think we're super special, and then we are pretty much proven that we're not super special. And this is the essence of believing in simulation theory for me, which is this humility that comes from believing that it's possible that we're in base reality, but if there were billions of simulated realities and one base reality, it would be very arrogant to believe that we were in base reality. So that's we'll start with that, and then maybe, so let's see how, if there are any different.
I would actually like to clarify a couple of points here. So first of all, how many people have heard of the simulation theory before? So a handful of you, okay. So here's the thing, my name is Gray Scott, by the way, I'm a futurist, and I've talked a lot about the simulation theory. It's actually one of the things that I study quite a bit. And when people ask me about the simulation theory, they tend to reference the matrix. But the matrix is actually not the simulation theory. It's a very different concept. The matrix is a brain in a vat scenario where there is an original human, and the computer is tapped into their brain, and the computer is simulating within their brain a reality. So that's the matrix. The raw this is where Professor Nick Bostrom from Oxford University came up with a thesis called the Ancestor Simulation Thesis. And basically what he was saying was, the likelihood that this is the original reality is astonishingly low because of the time that the universe has been here, right? The cosmos has been here. So now we could debate why we don't find other intelligent life in the cosmos at this point. To me, that's pointing towards the simulation. But the simulation itself, the theory of the simulation, is that if you imagine creating, let's say, a simulated consciousness within the substrate of a computer, there was for that entity inside of that computer, there was never an original organic being. It was always digital, right? But from the point of view of that conscious being inside of that digital substrate, it would think that it's a natural entity or human being. Now here's the thing, if we got to a place, and we know we are moving in this direction, there's a new video game coming out called No Man's Sky. Have you guys seen this? It's procedurally generated, meaning that when you're playing the game, every time you arrive to a new scene, the computer is generating a whole new set of algorithms for that world. And I think it's 18 quadrillion planets within the game. So our local star would burn out before you would play all the planets in this game. So we've already reached a place where we can procedurally generate a very realistic looking, for the game itself, for the world. So imagine, fast forward 100 years, if we're already doing that now, imagine 500 years in the future, or even 100 really, that we've created computers, quantum computers, that are so powerful that we can create not entire galaxies with all the details, but just enough information for the conscious being inside of the computer to only register what they're seeing. And the reason I'm going to prove this to you right now, the only thing you can be absolutely certain of at this very moment is what you can see.
First person observation.
Yes. That's the only thing from your conscious point of view, what you're seeing right now, you can prove just because you're experiencing that. That frame of reference, that can be simulated right now. You see television shows, commercials, and movies that are so realistic now, you cannot tell the difference. The CGI has gotten that good. We've crossed that uncanny valley. So here, just quickly, I want to wrap this up. So what I'm asking you to sort of suspend is this. There is a disconnection when you're talking about the simulation theory that it's hard for people to think on that level because we're so connected to thinking that all of this is real. But really, quantum physics is proving that that may not be the case.
Yeah, I love that. And we're going to get into quantum physics later. I realized that I did a little bit of a disservice to myself wanting to get in on this. So I didn't introduce my panel. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So really quickly, guys, if what you could do is just introduce yourself and what you do and how, and maybe a one sentence on I believe, I don't believe.
Sure, I'll jump in since.
So, great guys, we've met Greg.
My name is Keith Comito. I work with nonprofits to help life extension research, but I'm also a computer science mathematician, which is why I feel like I know a little something about this topic. And I'm going to sort of not be against the simulation hypothesis per se, but to show why it's maybe not necessarily logically sound to say it's likely. And I just want to have a clarification on a clarification and some historical data here. So the original idea came from somebody named Hans Moravec in like the 50s or something like that, which was later expounded on by Nick Bostrom. And sort of the formal, the one thing I want to clarify is Nick didn't necessarily say that the simulation is likely. He proposed three choices and said one of these must be true, and it's, we have no information to say which one is more likely, right? So what he had said was, I'm doing the truncated version here, is we can assume that there will be no future human civilization or post-human civilization that can make a simulation like this. It's impossible. That's choice one. Choice two is that it is possible, but for whatever reason, the society, no significant portion of such societies are interested in doing so, or they think it's immoral, or they don't do it. Or the other choice is then for the reasons that were discussed earlier, we're most likely in the simulation. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage there, and we can discuss more.
Okay.
And like I said, pitch it over to Luis.
Hi, my name is Luis Arana. I am an artificial intelligence engineer, and I've been a computer programmer for about 25 years. I'm older than I look. Worked for NBC, Sci-Fi Channel, worked on TV shows like Battlestar Galactica and Ghost Hunters. So I also think I come with some inside knowledge on this topic. I am open-minded but skeptical about simulation theory. I think that from my understanding of both of the major interpretations of quantum mechanics, that it is highly unlikely that such a thing is possible. I'll quickly explain that. There are two kind of schools of thought in quantum mechanics. I won't get too technical here. Basically, many worlds theory, maybe some of you have heard of that. The simulation hypothesis is based on the fact that there is one universe, and therefore, if it's possible to simulate, then there are billions to one odds that you are in a simulation. But I would argue that if you believe in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, that there are actually infinite universes, and then universes that can simulate are a subset of those, and because that subset is not infinite, each simulation is infinitely far away from each other on average, and that you are very, very nearly infinitely unlikely to be in a universe that is a simulated universe. If you don't believe in many worlds theory, and many physicists don't, it's kind of split down the middle. There's the Copenhagen interpretation, and if you believe there is one universe and you understand Copenhagen quantum mechanics, then that infers that the universe is non-deterministic and non-predictable, and therefore if you started a simulation, it would very quickly, noise would be generated from those unpredictable elements, and I wouldn't be able to to program in a Gray Scott or a Keith Comito, because by the time the 14 billion years had expired, the universe would have radically branched off into a different direction, and so it becomes very, very difficult, if not impossible, to simulate the real universe. And those are kind of the two major interpretations of quantum mechanics, so I would be surprised. On the other hand, I'm open-minded about it. Craig's absolutely right. Our subjective experience is that according to these same theories of quantum mechanics, like the world doesn't exist behind my head, and you're the only person in the universe, and they're all kind of, mind-blowing implications. So I don't rule anything out. We are just as infinitely unlikely to be sitting on this stage in this universe as we are to be in a simulation, and therefore, I think it is plausible if unlikely.
So, quantum physics is super important to this concept of reality, because it is the most recent thing that is radically changing how we think about reality. The way what Lewis mentioned about the world not existing behind your head is kind of one of the things that I've always talked about when discussing simulation theory, which is basically this idea that quantum particles can actually exist at two separate places in the universe at the exact same time.
All places, actually.
All places. They can exist at all places at the same time.
In all states.
In all states, and they only take a definite state when they are viewed.
When they're being observed.
When they're being observed.
Yeah.
Which is very similar to, if you can imagine playing a video game and walking around a room, and all of a sudden the new room exists, and you think, well, that room had to have existed before when I was in the other room. But in fact, it didn't exist.
Procedurally generated.
It was generated when your user viewed it.
Yeah.
And it turns out, the more we find out about quantum mechanics, that is in fact seemingly the building blocks of our entire
Can I say
universe.
this too? You sort of touched on all places at all time. So that touches on the many worlds theory. The simulation theory is it's not new. It's been around for a while, but my take on the simulation theory is a little different than Nick Bostrom and the other sort of ideas around this. I don't necessarily think that you have to have an original organic substrate that evolves into a species that's capable of making the simulation and then simulating the original. What I've been saying is that technology is natural, that there is no separation between our mechanical things that we're making and the cosmos. We didn't invent those things. That math was here before.
Mathematical realism is what it's
Yeah, computational cosmos. That stuff was here way before we even crawled out of the oceans. We interpreted mathematics and geometry, and we created these machines. That's why I think the simulation is true. I'm not saying that I understand the structure of the simulation, and the simulation is just a word I'm trying to use to describe the construct. But the proof, and this is what Jules was sort of talking about, the proof is there. The math and the geometry were here before we created Apple and all of those products. I mean, every computer is a crunched synthesis of geometry, math, and basic materials that we found in the system. But so I guess what I'm trying to figure out, and this has been sort of just, as every theory unfolds, you're trying to find where the proof is and where that's going, especially when we're talking about the future. We know that we're going to continue to make simulations that are going to be, whether it's in the gaming field, for medical or military, those simulations are getting more and more authentic and real. And so I would assume that with VR, virtual reality, and augmented reality, in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, you're going to be using augmented games that are going to look like you won't be able to tell the difference between the faces of these characters inside of this.
I think eventually that the natural progression of that is that real life seems bland and unreal because you have so much more sensory input. And,
Hey, let me ask you this. So what I'm trying to say here is the first level that we have to get past to discuss this is it possible? So let's deal with that.
So let's discuss that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to jump in here. So first, I just want to offer a word of caution about quantum mechanics because I just want to say that this interpretation is sort of, the world doesn't exist behind your back kind of thing. I just want to make it clear that that's one interpretation of the collapsing wave function that Richard Feynman and people like that put forth. But it's also possible that this indeterminacy before you are there and witnessing it, it might just be a mathematical representation of what we don't know. And then as we become more certain, the model becomes more certain. So I just want to be clear that it's not a slam dunk.
But wasn't Richard the one that talked about superposition? Where
Yeah. I mean, but the point is that superposition.
Let's unlock that a little. Let's unpack that a little.
Yeah.
When you say superposition, that's
Superposition is the idea that
not everyone cares.
Let's use like a truth, like a something that has multiple states. Say some value could have 1 billion different colors, right? So in the real world, what we would call the real world, we look at it and it has one value. It's blue, right? But in the world of quantum mechanics, superposition means that all of them are true. It's just like a fractional probability, and we're currently in the state where the fractional probability is such that it appears to us as blue, right? But the point that I'm making here is that whole indeterminacy soup might be the fabric of reality, which in this case it bolsters kind of these ideas, or it could just be a mathematical representation of the fact that we don't know it yet. So I just want to be clear about that.
There's a famous experiment called the quantum eraser. Have you heard of the quantum eraser experiment? So they it's similar to the double slit experiment. They basically shoot a photon through a slit and then see the photon pass, which photon the slit passed through. That's the basic the basic double slit experiment. So recently they've been doing time-delayed quantum eraser experiments, which show and they prove when you look at them, and then there's lots of videos on YouTube that explain it in layman's terms, and like at least will convince me, because I'm not a physicist. It's really fascinating that they have proved that it does not, your observation of it after it happens affects the past state of which one it went through. And that kind of just breaks down everything we know.
Yeah, we assume.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that it's maybe a mathematical trick or a remainder or.
So answer the question.
I mean, that's a
about-
physical reality. Like there are tests that you can do in the real world to prove those quantum mechanical
But let's talk about whether it is possible to simulate, right? So
I would say using something like procedural generation, it would be. It's a matter of resolution, is what we're talking about.
all right, so that's where I want to stop you, because we've been talking about resolution in the simulation idea for a while.
And when they say resolution, they mean like this is very real, and we can look into your cells, and we can get a lot of detail.
Okay, so
Here.
let's keep it just what we can perceive right now, right? So we see people in front of us. There's sensorial experience. You can touch them. You can smell. You can see. Part of the simulation idea is that and procedural simulation is that you wouldn't have to simulate a high-def version of a cell. Like, let's say if we looked at a microscope in someone's, their blood. That takes a lot of processing power, right? Because it's very complex. But you wouldn't have to do that except when they were looking. So you could save all that computational power. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? You can save all of this, because people have said, well, you need a universe-sized computer to do what you're talking about. Bullshit.
A real-world example of that would be something like Google Maps or Google Earth.
Or World of Warcraft, right?
Any of it.
You
gets
can
pushed to the
go
server,
down, a JPEG of the entire world would be way too big for anyone to download, but you could, it looks at the tile you're on, and then it downloads only those tiles around you, and as you take a step, just like the video game.
All right, so let's say we at least, because I'm trying to prove that this is true. So I'm using proof though, right? That's what we asked for. So we know that level is true. We know that in probably, and I would say my prediction is in about close to 10 years, virtual faces and bodies and those types of things will be so indistinguishable that you will not be able to tell the difference, whether it's human or not, or real or not. So if we know we're going to get there in 10 years, And you only have to simulate what you're seeing and what's in front of you at any given time. The rest of the computational power can go somewhere else. We know we're there. Okay, we can agree on that. So the next level is, if we know it's going to happen, at what point do we start to ask if that's our future, if that's in our future? And we're a very young species and a very young part of the cosmos. If an older extraterrestrial species that has intelligence followed the same evolutionary process, and let's remember that math and geometry is pretty stable
And
throughout the
statistically,
cosmos.
you have to assume that like, the universe is so big that you have to assume that
Well-
we're not the first ones to.
We can't be, there's
Yeah.
no way, it's too huge, it's too infinite. So, if that's the case, then there is a possibility that we literally are from an advanced intelligence from somewhere else that, for whatever reason, now we can go deeper into this later. I'm just trying to bring us up to a level where we can all assume that this is our future, that we are going to simulate.
Well, I think we're in agreement, right? We're in agreement as a panel that it's
All right.
possible to simulate.
First level down.
No. Although Keith,
Yeah,
let's
yes.
talk about it.
So I'm going to seek to undermine both of your points in a good natured way. So the first part here has to do with the nature of computation, right? And the big elephant in the room here is consciousness. So based on what you're saying, I 100% am sold that a brain in a vat kind of simulation, like the Matrix, totally doable, right? But this idea that we are completely digital, we are completely simulated, let me throw some mathematical pallor on that a little bit. So we don't know yet what consciousness is. We just don't have an agreed upon definition. And there are certain what some of you might not know is that there are actually levels of infinity that you can study very concretely in mathematics. Countably infinite. For example, countably infinite is what it sounds like. You know, something that you can enumerate, like the integers. You got your 1, you got your 2, whichever one you got, you know what the next one is going to be. It would take you forever to count them, but the path is clear, right? The real number line, for example, with all decimals, is not countable. It's just strictly bigger.
You'll
And
never
you
get to 2.
You can prove that by something called density, right? For any 2 numbers that you pick in the real number line, you can always slam one in the middle, but you can't do that for the integers. So the point is, if it turns out, because if you believe in mathematical realism, there are certain aspects of mathematics that are uncountably infinite, right? So if you believe in that, if consciousness turns out to be one of those things that relies on some kind of uncountably infinite related process, a computer, as it stands right now, can only perform countably infinite operations. So you would not, well, a quantum computer might throw this off, but let's get there first. But yeah, so that's just like,
And we know those are coming too.
but we don't know if they're gonna maintain their coherence. My point is, let's get there.
D-Wave already has one. D-Wave
Yeah,
already has
but it's very fragile and wouldn't be able to sustain us. So I'm not saying I'm against it, I'm just saying let's get there first on that. The second thing is this idea that, sort of, again, the ancestor simulation is that if we're gonna get there, let's assume we're gonna get there now, let's forget my previous point, assume we're definitely gonna get there. The idea that then to assume that we're living before that point is a little naive, that's kind of the key here, but
Wait a minute, what do you mean?
to assume that like our existence right now, we're in that rare situation where,
Okay.
yeah, before simulations were invented, and that's one of the reasons why people think that, yes, we're in a simulation, because it's just statistics. But, you can clarify me, but the key point I want to make here is that destruction, annihilation, is actually inherited downwards, right? So if we are the only real universe, we can destroy ourselves by one way. We just blow the earth up, right? But if I'm in a simulation, there's 2 ways that we can all just be wiped out. We can destroy ourselves, or someone can throw that computer in the trash. So if you apply the simulation hypothesis to every level, you have an infinite regress, right? That simulation could be a simulation, could be a simulation, and if you follow the mathematics all the way through, the odds that we should be destroyed goes to infinity. So I would say the fact that we are existing is a strong proof that we're not in a simulation.
But the other thing is you're You're also basing it on consciousness, and I want to urge everybody and the panel to stay away from consciousness because consciousness could be an entire debate.
And by the way, I think just to add this, but I think consciousness has a lot to do with our understanding of quantum. That this collapse could very well be what has moved intelligence and life and furthering throughout, from the very beginning of the universe. It makes sense that it would also be something that could be happening in here that we don't yet understand.
And I just want to clarify, I'm not proving you wrong with what I'm saying here. I'm just saying this is why I am not convinced that you can prove that it is right. Now, I don't think you can do better than plausible.
Do you think that we can, because a lot of people in the scientific community believe that emergent systems, as they become more complex, become conscious. And we're seeing that in every species, right? As the species evolves, they become more conscious.
Again, my problem is more fundamental than I'll kick it to you because I don't know if you have here, Luis. My problem is that we don't have an agreed upon definition of consciousness,
Okay,
so we can't even have a metric here.
Yeah.
That's what
There's
part before the horse.
consciousness is a whole other thing.
Yeah, I mean, we can have discussions later.
All right, so I'm coming at it from a different angle. I have a moral and philosophical argument against simulation, and that is you're essentially saying that there is a greater than human, because you have to be greater than our current technology to do such a simulation. Realistically, we can't do it. So there's a greater than human intelligence out there in the universe that understands us so well that it can simulate us, but allows us to suffer and die. And you're essentially creating like an evil god in that sense. You're just saying.
I have a question about that. Because if here's the thing, if you ask an atheist how we exist, right? They would tell you that it's physics. They would tell you that the Big Bang happened. The Big Bang created stars, which created universes, which created the Earth, which created us, and we crawled out of the primordial soup and eventually became us. That there is nothing out there that is making us special. So
If you follow that far back, then it just destroys itself. So there's, you get singularities at the beginning of the universe where even an atheistic scientist has to admit that I have no idea what happened. There was magic, insert magic here. We are getting more and more fine-tuned to see what, I'm talking about, trillions of a second after the Big Bang right now. We know what happens there, but there is still always this tiny sliver of magic in there. So, I don't consider myself an atheist. I'm a Buddhist, if anybody's interested in that. But I think that my life has reason and purpose and beyond just the cell came. That's the how.
I want to back Luis up a little bit from, again, classical philosophy. So I'm not saying that God is necessarily evil if he's this entity, right? But what is valid and is totally accurate to say is that there's a problem. There's a lot of problems in philosophy, right? And one of them is the problem of evil, right? So even if you say, okay, I completely understand the idea for death and why that's necessary, or whatever, you rationalize that, but why does person X have to burn alive in their car for 10 hours before they die, right? And that's a question in philosophy that you have to ask at God. Why evil? Why that, right? So what the fair thing that Luis is saying is that if this simulation is engineered by future humans or whoever, that question then does go to them. Why evil? Why that?
I just want to back up a little bit, though, because we've sort of gone down to this religious state, which is where it always ends up. And I'm trying to I want to keep it more into a scientific state, because when you start talking about consciousness and God, and I don't necessarily think that is accurate, that you have to have a creator for this to be a simulated cosmos.
Well, then we're talking about a natural phenomenon and not a simulation. Simulation implies a simulator.
yeah.
Well, not unless the cosmos itself is inherently computational.
Right.
If that's the
really
case,
a long
that's why I said
line.
earlier that I'm using the word
It's
simulation to
iteration, not
describe it.
simulation.
Yeah.
Well,
That's mathematical realism if you want to steer clear of his assaults.
Well, I don't necessarily think you need to have some sort of God creator or for this to be an actual simulated reality, right? A digital sort of substrate. And that's where I differ from Nick and those guys, is that I've been using the word simulation to describe that indigenous digital state, because there is no other way to talk about it. I mean, if you say to people that the cosmos is computational, that everything is computational, then what you're saying is that consciousness, whatever you think that is also computational. It's also mathematical.
Artificial intelligence.
And if that's the case,
Yes.
there is no magic.
You can be mathematical without computational, regarding my earlier point.
But there is no magic man waiting on a cloud, waiting for you to like unlock the next simulation. You don't have to have that for this to be some sort of simulated reality or digital reality. Now, if we want to get to the level where we're talking about humans existing on a server somewhere out in deep space, which is also possible, that to me actually feels less true. That doesn't feel right because, first of all, we're not going to have servers in the future, if you don't know. I mean, that technology is going to move away, and we'll move into something more advanced that we don't even have a name for at this point.
Hillary Clinton should.
So when we're talking about putting, here's the word conscious again. When we talk about putting conscious beings in some sort of simulated reality, we should debate that. Do you have to have someone that starts the original simulation?
You're actually, I'm not sure, you probably are aware of it, but you're touching something very, very old, actually, an ancient idea that's a variation of Hermetic philosophy.
Yeah, of course.
Which is essentially, glossing over all the grisly bits. It's basically like we're all like a dream in the mind of some supercomputer or God or something like that. And the reason why we exist is so that through our interactions, the universe will learn more about itself. So yeah, I can kind of get behind that. One other thing I want to bring up is when someone had mentioned Elon Musk earlier, right? And he went on the record not so long ago as giving some concrete statistic, like there's 1 in 8 billion chance that we're not in a simulation right now. And regarding my earlier points, I think that is, I love Elon, super support, respect him, right? But I think those kind of statistics are completely meaningless because I think that if you're assuming, like by the nature of your assumption, let's assume we're in the simulation right now. When you do that, you relinquish almost, if not all, ability to speak about the higher order dimension. Like, let me give you an example. I'm a video game creator, I've done that. So I create Pac-Man. Pac-Man is two-dimensional. That doesn't mean I'm two-dimensional. Its physics in its world have nothing to do with me. And furthermore, if Pac-Man tries to introspect by digging into his pellets and ghosts, he's never going to see the computer chips, right? So I feel like that's why. I feel like you cannot do better than say it's plausible. You can't say it's 72%, it's 12%, it's any percent, because you put yourself in the box if you're assuming it's true.
I actually thought, I've thought about this before. Could Mario at some point understand that he was, that his reality was not real? I think that if you try hard enough, you can. For example, he can.
If you give
He
him the
can look
algorithm,
closely, and there is a minimum quantum pixel size. His quantum is a pixel.
Yeah.
Maybe that serves to bolster the simulation theory, in that we also find when we get to the bottom that things like time and things like matter are not infinitely divisible, but there is a limit. There is.
Yeah. I think it's fair to
A
say
limit with totally different rules than the rules that we all
I think
stand for.
There are experiments that he could do
Yeah.
to determine the nature of his world.
It depends how well the simulation is constructed. But yeah, by that point, I think it might be fair to say that you could detect perhaps that something is amiss, but to actually reach up and say that, that reality has 5 dimensions, or, every blue, what I think is blue is red. You cannot do that if you're in the simulation.
Well, we have ideas and concepts like tesseract, which are, for spatial dimensional objects that we can do the math on and say, here's how it would look.
Right, you can come up with it as an idea, but you can't say that universe is definitely
all the way up to 10, 11, 12, 15 dimensions. So the fact that we can at least perceive of the potential existence of higher dimensions, that's why I think maybe there is some hope for Mario to realize that I know I live in a three-dimensional world, I'm actually a two-dimensional.
Yeah, I mean, you can come up with.
Yeah, Mario's not, he's not questioning,
Yeah.
and we are, so,
Yeah.
so that's.
Lazy.
Yeah, you can come up with what is called a probability space, right? But the point that I'm making about Elon Musk's prediction is that you cannot then, at this point, if you're in the simulation, say, yeah, that one is the one that exists outside the simulation. You don't know. You have to guess. Now, guessing is cool, but I'm just saying, I'm just putting like a dampeners on what we're able
Well, we're
to
not
do.
guessing though, we're creating the foundation and structure that will lead to, the ultimate question is, should we? I mean, the ultimate question is, should we? Because we know that we're going to be able to have the computational power to create, because I believe that eventually AI will become self-conscious.
Is it moral? Is it moral
Well,
to
that's the
simulate
question.
beings that can suffer?
And that's the question. So, I mean, not only just is it moral, but if you believe that we're going to get there, what changes once we do get there? What changes
Well,
once
what's the
we've
point?
seen a simulation be created and we can look inside and say, well, that exists? How does that change our perception of whether we're in a simulation?
Well, and also, what's the point? I mean, simulations are run for specific goals, right? You would simulate a military scenario, you would simulate a surgical scenario, whatever. You're trying to figure out something using a simulation because maybe it's risky, which would make a lot of sense if you look at our history. Maybe it has something to do with time dilation and speeding up intelligence. That could be something that we could talk about too. There was a paper that came out in Science Journal where they were talking about how they've proven that different species have different time perceptions, right? So the time perception for a hummingbird is very different than a time perception for a human. So the hummingbird.
My dog.
So yeah, animals have different time perceptions.
Humans
So-
also change themselves throughout their lifespan.
well, we have different time perceptions.
Yeah, when you're
If you've ever
older,
been in a
you-
car accident, your time perception slows down really, really slow. What is it? Sorry? Yeah, our perception is much faster, of course, but, so we know already that what we say is reality doesn't match up. I mean, we know that there are periods of our consciousness or our experience that can be manipulated or changed. Now, going back to this idea of should we and why should we, what would the purpose be for us in the future to simulate not even an entire species or a planet full of people that can suffer, because I hear that you're concerned about that, but this goes back to Alan Watts, who's one of my favorite philosophers. He always says that you have no experience without relationship. There is no experience without relationship. You have no experience of walking unless your feet and the floor are meeting. You have no experience to light unless you have dark. So to answer your question about the suffering idea, suffering seems horrible on our plane of existence, but to the greater good of relationship and learning, we have no idea, if this is a simulation, we have no idea what that next level, their intelligence and how they've evolved.
It could be a higher moral level that we don't understand.
That we don't even understand or
Surgery
grasp.
hurts, but saves your
That's
life.
valid. I was just pointing out that there is an issue there.
I just want to come to this question because I think this is important. If we are going there, why would we simulate a conscious being, and what would be the purpose for us doing that?
This is again an area where I feel like it might be problematic, because if technological progress does continue to exponentiate, you might be improving so quickly in your base reality that you almost have no need to create a simulation. That's hypothetical, right? Another thing that I want to point out that I realized when you were speaking there, you mentioned computation power, right? And I realized that there's a tacit assumption being made there. Let's assume that a civilization not so much more advanced than us, 100 years or whatever, we're just getting these simulations. They want to simulate cavemen, to do something or whatever, right? Think about the computation power involved at that point. At that point, before behaviorally modern humans, the universe in the computer could really just be the Earth, and the firmament could really just be a celestial globe with pinpricks of light through it, right? But then as the species in the computer gets more and more scientific knowledge, like all the layers of the onion peel back, now I gotta simulate a whole universe and this and that. And again, like, you know, so like that presupposes patches, right? So if anyone's played a game, you know, and they patch the server, you always see some funky stuff for a couple of days, right?
Does that have to be a patch? Could that not just be what you were talking about earlier, which is that
That's
as the universe kind of grows, it grows with it?
Oh, I'm saying, but we're talking about computers here. So I'm just saying, as a computer scientist, someone who's built artificial worlds, I know that, like, again, look, yes, maybe they built the simulation as like super huge universe from the start, but if we're going to assume that they're anything like us, which is an assumption, you know, they're going to be lazier. Let's try to simulate this in the quickest way I possibly can, using the minimum amount of resources. You know, they're not going to, you're not going to over-engineer it. You know,
So bugs that we could detect.
yeah, every once in a while you see a glitch in the matrix. I think is basically what I'm saying. Again, speculative.
Can I just take one point here about, I think that we agree on a lot of the same things, all of us. I think the definition of simulation is one thing that we need to clear up. So earlier you were saying that there's nothing unnatural. I believe that. I believe that like a robot, a car is not unnatural. Like we are a natural product of the universe and it's a natural product of us, and there's no such thing as unnatural that can exist in the natural universe. So that being said, you could think about a simulation the same way. All simulations, if you trace their realities back, all trace back to that one central reality. So at the end of the universe, when all particles are gone, when there is nothing left, even a memory where you can't rewind that back and see what was real, what was not real, all the simulations fold into each other and become just one higher reality. And so, you know, is it a simulation at that point? Is just conscious beings affecting their universe and causing new branches, which we do.
Well, here's a real.
I don't think the simulations would be any less real or natural than the original source of the simulations.
So that's the next thing I want to touch on, which is that what does it mean? Let's say we all agree that we are in a simulation. Does that change anything? Should it change anything for the audience? Is there anything we're going to do tomorrow differently? Is there anything we're going to think differently? I mean, how? And so this is what I want to unpack. What does it change?
So the thing is, and getting to your point, it doesn't make your experiences any less valid. It doesn't make our sensorial experiences, our sense of love, of family, of this, it doesn't make any of this any less real. I don't like that word real, but it doesn't negate what we're experiencing if it is a digital substrate. It just means it's a damn good one and we can't tell the difference. That's the only thing it means. Now, we get to the idea of, sorry, what was your question specifically?
Just, I mean, what does it change for everyone tomorrow?
Oh, so changing. Okay, so here's the thing. So for some reason, we are the generation that is crossing that bridge into the simulated future, because that is the future we're headed towards. There has to be a reason for that to happen to us. So if this is a lower reality simulation, either that's the purpose of the simulation.
To a simulation.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples of why recursive. Yeah. So a couple of the theories that I have on this are, one, they're trying to see just how long it takes us to figure out that it's a simulation. It could be that simple. I mean, it's taken us a while, but we are starting to question, is this a simulation? Which is dangerous because then maybe they turn it off when we figure it out. Two,
I was going to equal gods in that.
The purpose of the simulation could be something much more grand than we're talking about here tonight, and you guys have sort of talked about it. I've said for a long time, and this is my perspective, my only religious perspective, because I'm not religious, that there is no difference between you and I. There is no difference. That's the grand delusion, and this is the Hindu idea. There is no other. There is no you, there is no me. We are the same entity having multiple experiences at the same time. That is superposition, truly. And my idea for the simulation idea is that the purpose, if this is a grand simulation that is natural, that that's the way the cosmos unfolds, that the entire purpose for the simulated reality is for us to experience the other, right? So I live my life, I have my pain, I have my love, you live your life, you have your pain, you have your love. And we will never truly, we can tell each other about those stories, but we can never really know what that other person is experiencing, right? So maybe that's the point of the simulation is, and maybe this is the grand illusion. Maybe the simulation is so powerful that it has fooled us into thinking that there are more people in this room than one.
Just one more thing, I think Greg, you'll like this, but I was thinking about this recently, is that with some other futurist topics like brain uploading, if we agree that that's a future as well that we're likely to see, couldn't it be that these simulations were created to harvest
Experiences.
consciousness, experiences? I mean,
Okay, third, this is the last one, I swear. The third one, which is really kind of interesting, is and it does seem that we're on this trajectory to build machines that are self-conscious, self-aware, and that we may hit a singularity by 2045, maybe even earlier, where these machines become superhuman and they upgrade themselves and turn into something that we can't understand. And maybe there is some grand accident that happens in the future where all humans are wiped out. Now, the theory behind the way I'm thinking about this is that this could be an ancestor simulation run by machines of the future that are trying to understand what it was to be human. The same way we would try to run, and we're trying to bring back dinosaurs, right? So maybe that's what this is for. Maybe they're so interested in us that they're trying to
I would think to understand the complexity of the thing that you're simulating enough to simulate it that you wouldn't therefore have to like observe its behavior. Like you programmed its behavior, so you know more about dinosaurs than you would learn from watching dinosaurs if you can simulate that.
so here's what we also keep talking about, kind of seeming to me that when we talk about simulations, we talk about a simulation that is designed from the get-go. Versus what I was talking about earlier,
Simulation
where
means to me, and then we have to change it to like, what are we talking about? A recursive
But couldn't you just say that
algorithm that runs in every possibility, runs through the universe, like those.
well, just the
If you want to call that
parameters, couldn't you just put the
simulation, then
parameters of
I think
physics
so.
and say press go on the Big Bang? And then wouldn't we
Yeah, but let me say this quickly. You're assuming that if you write an algorithm, that the algorithm is always going to stay the same. We know that that's not the case because we're creating machines, artificial intelligence now that is starting to make its own algorithm. So if you may learn things from an advanced simulation that you didn't expect because the beings inside of that simulation would evolve, right? Depending on how fast the simulation was running.
And if you had sufficient computation power to allow it.
Well, I want to go back to that for a second because here's another question. If you're the outside person creating the simulation, are you observing the simulated beings from your point of view, or are you inside of their consciousness viewing the simulation?
Well, if we're going with the traditional model, it would be the external. As far as whether that other thing is possible, again, you go into tricky philosophical waters like the problem of other minds, and I would say the jury is out.
Avatars.
Let's get there first. But I wanted to comment on a few things. One that's a humorous one is, I think it might have been Ray Kurzweil that might have said it, as far as, what do you do if you learn this information that you're in a simulation? And I think it was him that said, well, you better make yourself interesting so you don't get shut down.
They don't turn it off.
Which is pretty funny. But another comment that I want to make is, I thought that your ideas that you were saying before about, knowing the other and experiencing the other, I find that to be a very compelling and beautiful understanding of the universe. And it's very much identical with my own. And I just want to point out how interesting that is, that you're coming at it from this very simulated idea, and I'm coming at it just from, this is the more likely the real reality, and we're kind of going to the same point, which I think answers your question to some extent. I feel like, well, what does it change? I would say fundamentally, nothing. Like, what what is the real excitement of the human experience, I think, is reaching up and learning and try to understand what the fundamental nature of reality is and playing with it and interacting and learning from everybody else. And whether that turns out to be simulation-based or not, I think either way it is great. So I just find that there's no real war here, it's just interesting.
So what it changes, in my view, is it provides a sense of purpose. It is the anti-argument to that, to saying that we just happened by accident and the Big Bang just, it negates that argument, because the simulation is run for, even if we don't know the reason, it's run for a reason. It's a, I'm not going to use the C word, but it is purposeful, and I think that would imply that your existence has a purpose, rather than I just live in a purely accidental world and I'm an accident of nature, and when I die, it doesn't matter.
Of course, what's to
so
say
that's
that
what would
we're
change
not-
for me. If there was some kind of scientific, proof that, wow, we have discovered that, we are in a simulation, then we start getting into religious and spiritual questions of like, why are we here? But knowing that there is an answer at the end, and right now we don't know that.
What if your purpose happens to be a negative purpose in that case, so like just to dance for the evil god that just wants to watch you squirm?
I hope I'm not one of those guys walking
I
around the
hope you're not
street
necessarily
grabbing photos tomorrow. Yeah.
You know what I think is very interesting though, is that, let's say,
Wow.
if you imagine a simulator, I put it to you guys to give me any definition of God by any existing religion that isn't immediately interchangeable with the simulator. That really, all of our religions already kind of discuss this. I mean, I know absolutely in Judaism, the concept that we are not living in reality, that we are actually existing within a construct that is there to...
Buddhism and Taoism, and
Yeah,
they all
all of them.
touch.
The only way there could be a potential non-interchangeability there is whether to us, it would probably be the same, right? But if you want to talk about, if there's such a thing as a true God or something like that, it would be whether he or it or she is all-powerful also in his own or her own reality, which we have no clue about. But for our purposes, yeah, probably the same.
It's also too that you don't have a simulator mythology that says you have to worship the simulator, right?
Yeah.
I mean, well, and I'm not advocating
Definitely
for
don't
that.
want
I'm
to
not
piss it
advocating for
off,
that.
yeah.
I don't want. Well,
Maybe
someone
he wants
may.
to piss it off.
But I don't want to
So,
put
yes.
that out there either, because I think that's disingenuous, and it also takes us back down a road of religion where we're not being scientific. The whole point of me talking about the simulation is to stay in the scientific realm with this, to look at the proof of where we're going based on what we've done already, right? So you're building, that's an algorithm, you're building on the real science and the real technology and the real math and the real geometry that exists already in the universe. So maybe the simulation, maybe someone needs to come up with a new version of what that means, right? So it doesn't have to have a simulator. It could be indigenously digital, the cosmos, and maybe you use the word magic, and we tend to use the word magic for things we don't understand, but it could be that magical, that the Big Bang could just be that recursive digital structure that just keeps going.
That's what I believe personally. Just believe.
No, I thought about that too. I thought about that
but
too,
I
but-
absolutely think that the universe recursively tries every single possibility, everything that can happen must happen, and that the end of the universe leads back to the beginning of the universe, and how many times that goes
Well,
around
that's
to
the infinity
I don't know,
idea.
but it's very similar to the wheel of Dharma from Hinduism, or reincarnation from Buddhism.
Again, from
See, that's another question. Why do we find all of these? Because if you look at the symbol for infinity, if you look at a lot of the geometric shapes from ancient Egypt, in Hermetics as well, the wave patterns, these are geometric shapes. So built into every religion is this math and geometry. It's been hidden by a lot of things, but it is there. So maybe someone needs to redefine the idea of simulation to make it so that there is no simulator.
Religion is the search for meaning and truth, and mathematics fundamentally provides meaning and is truth. So I think that it's a natural some people take it to pseudoscientific levels, numerology and things like that. But they are related. There's a reason numerology is attractive to us, because mathematics and patterns and fractals and circles, they appear in nature, and they have their own fundamental. There is something fundamentally true about a circle, independent of the physical universe.
Yeah, I also want to, again, make the point that I believe that there is a vigorous debate going on about this very topic in philosophy and physics. And like I said, it's called mathematical realism versus mathematical fictional. And that's the term that I think you're reaching for here, is mathematical realism, with people like Max Tegmark and people like that talking about it. And to give you an example, I personally lean in that direction as well, and I'll just give you two examples or points for it, right? One is that the other side of the equation is that math is just a human construct to explain things, where mathematical realism is like, no, like the universe is mathematics, which I think is in line with what you're saying.
Yeah.
So there have been a couple of kind of cases in history that kind of back that up, like for example, imaginary numbers. These were kind of constructed by mathematicians just sort of exploring math, and they had no application in the real world. For those of you that don't know, a mathematical number could give rise to a term that, like +5 or something.
The negative square root of a number.
Yeah, so if you have an equation like times itself or something, you'll get a term that comes out of nowhere, but it is legit mathematics. But then like 50 years later in like rocket ballistics or something like that,
true, right.
they found that,
imaginary numbers.
Yeah, so it's like,
are actually
they weren't looking,
they exist.
so they weren't looking for it, they just, discovered it and then found something that was physically representative. Another point is microbes. Some organisms like paramecium, when they're kind of deciding where to go towards food and stuff, it's not just a representation. They actually, by the physical operations they're doing, they do calculus, like the same homework that you do, they do. So that's the point, again, that like math isn't just a human thing. So I just want to kind of throw that out there.
Well, it's also too, you have to remember that your brain is it is a computational organ, right? Every time you get up out of your chair, there are computations going on in your head to figure out balance and geometry and structure and all of that. So that's sort of how I've been tying this idea of simulated consciousness, right? If we have to go back to that word, that we are constantly using math inside of our brains to figure out the world. And so if that's the case, our brain literally emerged and evolved within a computational system. Anything we create from that organ will be computational. That you can't separate out those things. And so when people say, well, when we've talked about this with AI a couple months ago, people say, well, artificial intelligence machines are evil, and man is creating these evil machines, and it's like, that came from us, right? Like, that came from our evolutionary process.
Yeah, I always say as an artificial intelligence engineer that AI doesn't want your bananas. We're monkeys fighting over bananas and worried that AI is going to take all the bananas, and fundamentally missing the point of what AI is in the first place. Like those violent tendencies and things, those are built up from ancient programming that rely on existential crisis, kill or be killed, and things like that. And AI just doesn't have that. So it's
So I think we've done a lot of talking. I don't know if there's anything you guys want to add before we kind
I
of
would like
move
to
in, but I
add
feel like
I would
at
like
this
to add
point,
one quick thing, because I've been arguing against simulation all night, and now I'm going to provide a good argument for simulation, and that is that you can prove it's a simulation. Looking at the other people in the room, looking at everything exists in reality, that's actually not there. The light wave, the photons are bouncing off of him, and there's a signal in your brain, and they're called qualia. Like, that experience is only inside of yourself.
and my quality
in a
is
subject
your
such as
quality.
time, it takes a certain amount of time for the photon to bounce off of you and get back to my eye. It takes a longer time to bounce off of the door. So that door exists in a slightly different frame of reference of time than you do, and he's slightly closer in time. And there is no present moment that can be proven. When you look at quantum mechanics, there isn't. The closer you look at something, really the fundamental nature of consciousness is a simulation inside of our brains. Yeah. I mean, even the brain itself, that concept that you have of your brain is not your brain. It's a picture of what you think your brain is inside your brain. You'll never get to the bottom of the
And
rabbit
to
hole.
really understand that, all you have to do is do mushrooms. And you'll very immediately understand how what you see in front of you is only data being interpreted by your brain. And if you put something in your brain,
DMT is good at that as well.
yeah, well,
DMT is even more geometric.
see now we're
Yeah, I guess I'll make a final point then too, and I'll piggyback off of yours. So basically, I would like to say that when you're going to get hot and heavy in a discussion about this, as Luis just shown us, be careful about defining what you mean, because the definition of simulation that he used is a little bit different than the definition that we're using, and that's fine. But if you're going to have a meaningful discussion about it, make sure you be very clear about what kind of simulation you're talking about, right? And again, I would just like to reiterate that whether we're in a simulation or not, I think there's room for human agency in either case. And I think the most fun thing that we can do is explore and learn about each other and project whatever your concept of good is into the world.
on that subject, there's an old concept of how is it possible that there might be somebody above us kind of that created or is controlling the universe, and at the same time, how do we have free will? How does free agency and how does it all work together? And there's this concept, it's called Laplace's demon, and the basic idea is that if you knew every detail of everything, you could actually predict with perfect certainty what was going to happen in the future. So,
Remember, you couldn't predict the nuclear decay of atoms.
That's why
everything but nuclear decay.
Well, the point, again, the quick point that I just want to make there is that you might hear like uncertainty and the fact that you can't model things is sort of like a bummer or something like that. But if you look at it in terms of free will, like that's what gives you the room. So that's sort of the uncertainty principle and the incompleteness theorem. If you want to do some mathematical look up those two terms. They're actually very empowering and exciting if you look at them in the right way.
Oh, okay, so we've talked a whole bunch, and I'm sure that you guys have a question or two, so we're gonna open up now and we'll see as best we can further this conversation. So.
Actually, regarding your question about how it would change for us if we actually, the simulation, what I see is, let's assume we are, and everything's just bits. Like, it just gives you a whole new freedom of thinking of what you can actually do with the simulation. It's programmable. It's malleable. It's not as rigid as we have been thought.
Yeah.
Like, so that's I think like the key thing. Even if it's not, how about we just assume it is, because that's where we're getting to, right?
That's very Matrix, right? So as soon as Neo understood that he was in the Matrix,
He could control it.
it allowed him to control.
And that's why many philosophers actually argue this in terms of free will. Like, even if free will is not real, you should act like it is. Yeah.
When you're talking about the observer, there can't really be a simulation without an observer. The observer is the whole point of it. So really taking from the perspective of the observer only can observe with the five senses, the little slits in the tower, so to speak. Alan Watts once said, he refers to the sword that cuts but cannot cut itself, the eye that sees but cannot see itself. The mind can never transcend the mind. So all of this is stuck in the mind. The whole concept that we've been talking about, a simulation, collapses into oneness, and you start to get at that too, and it becomes irrelevant because it's a subset of the mind, of the observer.
Well, that's what I was asking and sort of brought up earlier, is that I was asking that question whether if you were simulating this scenario, would you stand outside of the simulation and watch the beings, or would you put yourself in the simulation? And I actually think that there is no outside observer doing that, that any being that's capable of simulating this would be, I mean, why would you not get into this if it looked like this, if it was this real? I would just step into this world. But to do that, this goes back to Alan Watts' point about relationship and experience. You do need relationship to have any experience, right? But you also have, I've been calling this the human illusion syndrome, where you would have to have a superposition, right? So you're all things at all times. So we're all the same person experiencing different frames of reference all at the same exact time, there has to be a sense of amnesia that is true for you to have experience. When one of you comes up to meet me for the very first time and I meet you, that illusion of novelty has to be there for us to learn something about each other. If I knew that it was a simulation, right? So maybe if this is an advanced simulation, that creator's not standing outside looking. The creator's here, it's here, it's here, it's here. Right? So, and that goes back to every religion, that God is within.
I was just going to say, again, that's Spinoza, that's Hermetic philosophy, that's totally.
I mean, it's as long as we keep talking about like recursion and how like simulations exist. Like, what if like, cause for example, we have synapses in our brain that happen and splits of microseconds and whatnot. What if we? Well, exactly. Well, that's another point. But the thing is, what if we are synapses in another brain that is just constantly advancing, and that's what this idea of simulation is. We are a simulation of another brain, and then recursion, of course. But like, just as it happens in our brain, why isn't it the same way?
You just see the same fractal pattern that we find at the macro, you find it at the micro, right?
Yeah.
So for example, if you look at patterns of roads and rivers, that looks like a neural set in the brain. And you're right, we do sort of interact the same way that neurons interact. I mean, there's an exchange of energy, right? There's an exchange of information. And I think, and the more that we sort of back out, as the Hubble has shown us all these amazing pictures of our universe and our cosmos, we're starting to see that those structures look very familiar. It does look like a neural set. It looks like a neural picture of the brain as you back out into the universe.
There's a really fantastic, you guys can look it up, it's a new equation for intelligence that's a TED Talk. And he basically boils it down to this, which is that intelligence is the algorithm basically says that intelligence will always make a decision that maximizes future decisions. And when he plugged it in, it looked as like one actor, it worked. And then as you added other actors, it was the exact same thing all the way up until we get to kind of this macro level where we're looking at the universe, still worked. So I think to that point that, we see a lot of this.
As above, so below. That's a Hermetic principle. As above, so below.
And you see the same pattern that he's saying about being parts of the whole. Like even us as a human being, like we are a collection of single cells, and even many of those single cells are not human. And then you could go higher than that and look at something like a corporation. Like no individual person of the corporation, anyone in the corporation can go to jail for stealing from the corporation. The corporation is the corporation. It has its own goals, independent of the individuals inside of it.
But it becomes its own
It
organization.
is a form of intelligence on its own. It has goals, it has methods, it has interactions and relationships. Companies sue each other. That's not the CEOs doing that, right? I mean, in any collection of human beings or even any collection of bacteria or cells
Start to act like it.
generally in aggregate become something emergently more than the sum of their parts.
Or even like programmically or electrical engineering. It's like the same thing when it's like you're creating AIs, you're doing like computer engineering with like hardware. It's like the synapses are exactly the same. The software controls the hardware, the hardware controls the software, and then we are like the
Can I actually say this real quickly, because I meant to say it earlier, I forgot. This is why I think that the structure is used simulation or computational, is that all you have to do to find out what the big secret is to look at what we're creating. I mean, as above, so below. Anything that we produce is a reflection of the cosmos. We're not in touch with the cosmos in the way that we can sort of tangibly say, oh, that's a map of what I'm creating here. Right?
Yeah.
So to me, that is the proof. There has to be a reason why we're creating simulations.
Yeah,
And it's connected to the bigger system somehow.
I would take issue with just the word proof there. Like there's nothing to guarantee that as above, so below will extend infinitely. I'm not saying that it doesn't. I think it would be cool if it does. But another kind of point here that's interesting is this is, again, very related to the idea of consciousness, right? When in philosophy, consciousness is never a word that exists by itself. It's always consciousness of, right? So if you mentioned corporation, what about bees and things like that? You can think of it like set theory in mathematics. You know, an individual bee is conscious of things that the group is not. And conversely, the group of bees is conscious as a collective of things that no individual bee is. So in a sense, you know, that kind of goes to your question of the simulator being in the simulation or not, and what is their role. You know, I'm not saying I believe in a particular thing, but the point is that there's a whole spectrum of interesting potentials there.
Yeah.
I think as above, so below goes pretty high up. Okay.
Yeah, I just have one question that's really just like more of a clarification. When you're talking about simulation, right? So Keith programs video games, he's three-dimensional and they're two-dimensional. I'm assuming he can program a fifth-dimensional computer game. And we're talking about simulations where it's in some sort of, some sort of server somewhere, right? So does the simulation, can you have two different types of simulation, or are you predicating the simulation on a creator that must exist also in higher dimensions to create only three-dimensional simulation, or can that thing also just be three-dimensional and create a three-dimensional simulation? Because you can simulate a three-dimensional world and you're in three dimensions. Or is the simulation you guys are talking about necessitate a higher dimensional that encompasses three dimensions and additional dimensions?
I can answer that first. I'm sure you guys have something. So I would say that it's possible, and certainly brain in that way, matrix way, it's possible, and may even be possible in this other way. But it all depends on the physics of the universe, right? Like we don't completely have four-dimensional with time physics sussed out. For example, you had mentioned like, you know, how big does a simulation have to be, right? That's still an open question because you might fall down on certain things. There are limits that we know of, like the Planck scale and stuff like that. And if it turns out that to represent consciousness in a simulation, you need something smaller than the Planck scale, well then we're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
We can't do it. But if that's not the case, then we can. So I'd say it's
Not yet. Not yet.
not yet.
Yeah.
So it's open question.
But let me clarify this. Let me clarify this
Yeah.
too, because you touched on the main idea of the problem that I have with the simulation theory right now is that there are a few different variations of the theory itself, and I want to write a new theory for the simulation where it clarifies that to me it's not about us being stored on some server somewhere, because to me that just sounds dreadful. And not only does it sound dreadful, it also it sounds like. Well, it sounds like a limited future for some advanced civilization that would do that. It's much more, to me, it's much more mysterious, and the language is still yet to be defined. But I don't want to, you talked about earlier creating a new religion. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in us rectifying the problems that religion has given us, right? So it all started with math and geometry and got covered up by fear and wars and greed and those types of things. So it does need to be redefined so that people don't say, well, you're talking about some 14-year-old kid who's storing your consciousness on a server in the future. I don't like that idea.
I would say to answer his question that I think that beings of any dimension can simulate beings of any other dimension. Our string theory and M theory and theories that use 15 dimensions, that is a simulation of a higher dimensional reality by definition. And it's also, by the way, highly accurate. A little off, but highly accurate to the natural world. There might really be 15 dimensions or more. Also, mathematics itself, so you have to think about like the algorithm that's running this, like Super Mario's, let's say. Super Mario's not two-dimensional. Super Mario is zero-dimensional. The mathematics are zero-dimensional. You're using a two-dimensional representation as a visual aid for your three-dimensional eye. Mario is not the screen. Mario is the electronics passing through that are zero-dimensional. So we can all simulate anything we want. It just depends on our knowledge of such.
Well, that's part of the illusion too. Getting back to your
One last
point.
thing, even our three-dimensional universe, there are theories of physics that have not been proven wrong that say that our universe is a giant black hole, and that we exist. The holographic universe theories that we are actually two-dimensional, and only us spinning the record makes us three-dimensional. We probably exist on the very edges of the universe. That's a plausible scientific theory that people win Nobel Prizes for discovering.
Look up
should be taken seriously. So I think dimension itself, between the zero-dimensional math and the relativistic dimensionality of our own selves, like there probably is no such thing as dimension.
That's a great point. If anyone's curious, you can look up a book, I believe, called The Black Hole Wars. And it was about how this ex-plumber, Leonard Susskind, basically had a war with Stephen Hawking about this concept about whether what Luis is saying is right. And I believe at the end, Hawking capitulated and said, it's a pretty good idea.
They can't prove it wrong.
Yeah,
Right.
so. Yeah. In the back.
If you think when we first, as humanity, when we first started to build physical machines, gears and conveyor belts and all of that, we started also to develop theories of the body as a machine. How is this conversation similar or different to that, right? Now we have computers, we're creating simulations, and now we're developing a theory of our experience that is a computer simulation. So how is this conversation similar or different to that conversation?
I think it's actually very identical, and the way that you look at that is just language, right? As you look at how these sort of terms, these mechanical terms work themselves into language, and how now computer terms work themselves into language. You might be really tired and just be like, my RAM's not working today or something like that. So I think the nature of us projecting ourselves through our tools and then internalizing our tools into ourselves is a give and take that has always been part of humanity and is very identical, just a new version of it.
So according to the theory, how much of human history would you say we've been in simulation? Has it been from the beginning? Was there a crossover point?
I would think it would be all of it.
It would probably be all of it.
Although,
Actually,
to be fair though, how would we have any idea of knowing that like I think that yesterday happened,
Yeah.
right? But like you could hypothetically have created a simulation that
The
has
server could have booted up
in
and
it.
given you the memory. So yeah, I
Well,
guess
you lose consciousness. You lose consciousness every night.
Yeah.
I mean, you could just reboot the server every night or whatever the system is.
And don't you kind of know that the world is blinking on and off in essence?
Yeah, every time you blink,
right?
like about 40% of your day, like you don't see.
It's in the dark.
Your brain just does some Photoshop, but I think follow up.
Just a quick one. So if we assume that simulation happened from the very beginning, whatever that is, and we say that we've been getting better and better as far as making our world more of a reality, whether it's through virtual reality or whether the simulation is better, how would we even know that that's even true? Like, what would we even, if we said, okay, we were in simulation from the beginning, what if this world, hypothetically, according to that principle, is not similar at all to whatever the real?
So you're saying the top level may look nothing like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that is a possibility, especially if you're dealing with, post human civilization. If it's machines, if machines happen to come here 1 million years after we've disappeared off this planet, they find our remains. They may just be using the low resolution history that they find to define us. But you brought up something interesting that I hadn't really thought about. It's interesting because as our resolution has gotten better over the last, let's say, 50 years, that's sort of what's happened with us as we've evolved. Human resolution has gotten better. I mean, if you just think about it that way, it's almost like watching a small version of what we're doing with computers, where it's not zeros and ones on the computer screen anymore. Now you have CGI, but you can't tell the difference. And so human evolution is sort of, the resolution is getting better.
In some sense, you can almost make a biological argument for that too, like, from single set organisms.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But to the question over there, this is exactly the point that I raised when I was mentioning the Pac-Man universe, right? Is that, I'm three-dimensional, Pac-Man's two-dimensional, he would probably guess, or, from his perspective, like he would probably infer that the creator is two-dimensional. He has no idea, and that's why, in my opinion, I'm not saying it's incorrect, but I have a hard time, say, with an Elon Musk type of figure, saying like, oh yeah, there's a 63% chance that simulation, we're in a simulation and the higher dimension is 5. Like, I'm not comfortable with that. I think you can do no better than it's plausible, and I might detect some indication here that makes me think I'm in a simulation.
So we're gonna do 2 more questions. We'll do you and then you.
So I feel like you talked a lot of simulation as a singular kind of global thing here, and then towards the end you a little bit kind of touched on the idea of like each person kind of having their own perception and or simulation. And I'm curious, are those two ideas at odds with each other, or is that just kind of semantics of the singular versus the plural of simulation?
I don't think it's, I mean, when you're dealing with an advanced civilization that's a million years ahead of us, who knows? I mean, it could be both. There could be enough computational power to run your simulation, your view of the world, and have all of your individual experiences, and then all of these other entities at the same time. That could be one way of looking at it. The reason, and I just want to say this before we close out tonight too, the entire reason why I think this theory is so important and why I talk about it so much is because it gives us a new scaffolding to think about what we're making, right? So we're not going to use religious ideas as we move into the technological future because those things are becoming antiquated in a way. But the math and the geometry that exists in those religions, that is going to be relevant in the future. So it unlocks a lot of the content of why we are creating our technologies in the future. That's the main reason I like talking about this. Even if it just gets people to think about what are you, because I know a lot of people here have startups and they have, they're making games and computer programs. My question to you is, why are you doing it? Because there's an algorithm to it, it has to lead somewhere. So the question is, why are you doing it?
If I, as a scientist, were given the task of how would I approach the problem of determining whether we are in a simulation or whether this is a real reality, one of the first things I would look for is boundaries and edges. And an infinite universe implies a non-simulation. Whereas a finite universe can imply, there's an end to this, and it is more likely to be simulated or a lower dimensional representation of something higher dimensional. If you find that the universe is infinite, then to learn how to simulate the infinity of the universe, even procedurally, you would have to know the whole infinite universe, and so you can never simulate an infinite universe. You could only approximate an infinite universe. So I would look for how far infinity goes. And that's a question in physics that we don't have an answer to.
I was going to say, as an interesting corollary to that is you just look at physics, right? Particle smashers and stuff. It's not phrased in the same way, right? But in some sense, that's what you're doing. You're, colliding these particles to get some really crazy stuff to happen because you're looking for kind of a glitch in a sense. You're looking, if you're going for the simulation hypothesis, right? If anything weird's going to happen, if you're ever going to prompt a glitch or a server patch or something like that, it's going to be at those edges.
So Pac-Man could find out that he was in a simulation, or Mario could find out he was in a simulation by measuring the boundaries of his world and realizing that he exists in a finite world.
This guy only goes like this.
You find the end. Yeah, right. Eventually, you're gonna hit the exit door. Yeah.
Okay, and I think we had Beth.
Yeah, okay, so this feels like a little bit of a deviation, and it's kind of more like a free association I'm having as I'm listening to everyone talk. But she mentioned like the Hermetic principle of being in the dream of a god, or like losing consciousness every night. And it just makes me curious about our experience of dreaming. Like, since we and other animals do it, is it just sort of
simulation? Is
it just a quirk? Like, does simulation theory have anything to say about the purpose of dreaming, like at night?
Answer really quick. at the end of the universe, this is something called the heat death of the universe. Everything is going to break down, and there will be no way to rewind and prove we were ever here, right? So, the human concept of the unicorn, it doesn't exist, or your dream doesn't exist, right? But your dream is actually a real manifestation in your brain, just like any other visual sense. And at the end of the universe, there is no way to prove that your dream was any less real than you were, just like you have the infinite simulations. Everything that happens is a natural product of some ultimate reality, and the fact that you're here observing is the only concrete proof you have of your own reality. I think therefore I am.
Yeah, I'm glad you ended with Descartes there, because I want to do an interesting version of it. So as far as whether it's been looked at as, is there a purpose to dreaming in this? I'm not sure, but whether there's an analog and whether it's interesting and it's sort of part of potential recursive structure, absolutely. You know, it's interesting how things seem to be repeated. And on that point, there's a really good poem by a Japanese poet, Soshia, I think his name was, and some of you might know it. It's like, I'm going to butcher it because I haven't read it in like 20 years. But it's like, I had a dream that I was a butterfly, and then I awoke, and I was clearly I, and not a butterfly. But am I really a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, or am I that butterfly now, dreaming that I'm a man?
I almost kind of want to end on that.
Yeah.
I think that was freaking beautiful. But anyway, unless our panelists have anything else to say.
The only thing I had to say about the dreaming was that 5 years ago, I started talking about recording dreams. And at the time, it was based off of a research paper, and there's a Japanese research team that had developed a system where they were using an EEG headset that was monitoring the brain waves, and they were putting the subject in front of a television, black and white screen, and they were watching the television screen, and the monitor on the other side was outputting what they were seeing based off of the brain waves. Obviously, that's not dreaming, but it's the first stage in getting what you're seeing out of your head into a screen and manipulating that. It wasn't one-to-one because the pixels were really rough and there's a lot of extra noise, but it was so, you could see on that screen the output of what they were seeing, right? And I said 5 years ago, this is the primary stage of dream recording. And now we know that this is going to be possible. I don't know what the latest research is, but from the looks of the way things are moving, we will have access to recording our dreams in the future.
Yeah.
And when we do that, I said this 5 years ago, we will unlock, that's one of the greatest mysteries we have. You want to talk about a mystery? The dream world is untapped, unknown land. And once we get to a place where we can record our dreams and play them back, I think it's going to change who we are as a species.
Yeah, I think I just want to quickly follow up with some data on that. But yeah, I think it's totally awesome, because how many times have you had like an amazing idea and then you wake up and you're like, damn, what's going on? So this, it's really stunning if you watch it. Like, yeah, it's not one-to-one, but it's like, you know, you could make out like, you know, Hillary Clinton versus George Bush or something. You know, it's enough to be recognizable, which is kind of creepy but cool. But it boils down to, I guess we got lucky in that the visual systems of the brain and the neural activity, just by the way the brain physically is like, there's a pretty good like topological map that maps onto like your eye and your visual system. Like if there's a bright light here, like the neurons like are in that shape, like in your brain. So we kind of got lucky on that. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, wow. Okay, we talked a lot tonight about a whole bunch of things, super deep. I'm sure you guys are going to Google some things after this. I think we're going to all hang around a little bit. Feel free to hang out, get a drink, talk with the various people that were involved tonight. As always, thank you very much for coming. We try to do this every month. It's called Futurist Sessions. And I believe we'll be doing it next month on either the 23rd or the 24th. Topic to be decided, but I've recently been thinking that we should be talking about universal basic income, so I'm thinking that that's where we might come back. Anyway,
on the foresight for that.
yes, amen to that. Anyway, again, thank you very much, and see you next time.